in the interest of time. Okay. Afternoon, everyone. Afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining our learning session, our community of practice. I think this is long overdue. We're supposed to have done this last year. We postponed, and I'm glad, I'm happy you still managed to come in and join. So we have a very exciting lineup for you, and this is a topic that really is very important, has been important for several months. I think of all the surveys we have done, this still came up, that funding was a big issue. And again, this couldn't have come at a more opportune time, given everything that's happening in the States, all over the place, the reduced funding and all the challenges that we are facing. So this is coming right at the perfect time. So a few housekeeping rules. For interpretation, as usual, if you see the little globe, we have Spanish interpretation. I know we had put in French, but we didn't quite manage to get the interpreter, and I do apologize for that. So we only have Spanish interpretation. If we do have French speakers that need to come in, please you can raise your hand and you can let us know, but we really do apologize, and we will try and work this out much faster next time. So we only have Spanish interpretation for now. And if I can ask, if you're not speaking, if you can mute your mic and also even your video so that there's fewer distractions. And we can only have those that are speaking. And the space is safe for anyone, for all issues that you want to raise. I think we want to believe that this is a platform where everyone is welcome to speak and share their experiences. So I think from my end, I really welcome you, and I look forward to the discussions today. And I will hand over to Elizabeth. You remember our consultant who has been working with us managing the community of practice, and she'll give us an introduction on the topic for today and how we start. So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Malene, and hi, everyone. Like Malene said, I'm a consultant that's on Malene's team and just helping her with setting up and managing this community of practice. Thank you for all of you for joining. And we know how topical but also sensitive the issue of funding is. So we're really glad that we can have this joint discussion about the issue today. So we're flipping things up a bit. We have a number of expert speakers from different funding spaces who will be sharing with us today. Malene, are you raising your hand or are you just waving?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, Lisa, for disturbing. We just realized again from our surveys last year and some of the requests that you want to have an in-person meeting. So we are planning to host an in-person meeting during CSW. So we just need to know the numbers. Who is traveling to New York? So there's a link I've put in the chat. If you're traveling to New York, please just indicate your name and your organization, what day you are arriving in New York and when you're departing. We just need to establish at least how many people are going to be in New York and what kind of a room we would need for an in-person meeting. So I'd forgotten that bit. So the link is in I will keep putting it back in the chat. So over to you, Lisa. Sorry.
No worries, Malene. Okay, so I do want to encourage you. You'll see in the chat, there's a link. Click on it, just give your information so that we can set up a big enough space at the right time for everyone who is able to attend CSW. Okay, so back to what we're doing today. Like I said, we have a number of expert speakers, but we want to flip the order a bit by starting with open discussion. We have about 20 minutes now that we want to ask everyone and anyone in the room, your commitment makers, your leaders of the ACGBV, to share about your experiences of funding. The good and the bad. So like what has been positive experiences? What has been challenging? What are key lessons that you've learned in the process of seeking funding for your GBV programming? What are key lessons that you've learned around engaging with funders, engaging with donors? And maybe also to flag what are the key things that you would like funders to know? You know, what would you like to share with funders? Now, I realize we just started and we're all used to when we join a webinar that we just kind of sit back and let all the information roll over us. So now I'm asking you to please take part. Raise your electronic hand, put up your hand. I'm going to keep an eye on who's raising in a hand. And then it's your turn to speak. You're sharing your experiences, what you found challenging, what you'd like funders to know. The only requirement is that you don't speak for more than 2 minutes. We want to give as many people as possible the chance to speak. So I'm going to be watching the clock. After 90 seconds, I'm going to interrupt and say you have 30 seconds. And when it gets to 2 minutes, I'm going to ask you to stop, even if you're in the middle of a very interesting story. So please raise your hand. I always find it really awkward in webinars where we're just opening the floor and now we're hoping for someone to speak, but I am going to get through that awkwardness because we really want to give the floor to you to share your experiences and what you want funders to know and understand about the process. Johanna, if I'm missing someone raising their hand, please tell me, but it should be showing up on me, on my side. But I'm not seeing at the moment. Carmen, I see that you switched on your video. Do you wanna share, please? It still shows that you're muted, so if you can just unmute yourself, please.
Sí, buenos días. Recién tengo acceso a la reunión, pero sí tengo algunas preocupaciones porque en este momento de pérdida de la democracia en nuestro país, que es Perú, las ONGs están sufriendo una persecución y principalmente aquellas que defienden los derechos humanos y en especial la incorporación de la perspectiva de género en las políticas públicas, ¿no? Entonces, en ese sentido, a mí me parece que el apoyo financiero debería ser más ágil, más rápido y tener una información de quiénes en este marco que estamos viviendo en el Perú hay posibilidades de financiar algunos proyectos, ¿no? Gracias.
Thank you so much for that, Carmen. I appreciate it. I also want to ask our speakers today to take note of what's being raised in this discussion. Also, maybe what Carmen raised around the agility of funding. So that process of funding itself can be very laborious and lengthy, and the need for agile funding that's adaptive. If we can respond to that also in our later discussions. The floor remains open for anyone else in the room to share what their experiences are, what their needs are of funding and how it's being shared, please.
Lisa, if I can come in, I mean, we are trying not to speak as UN Women, but I think as people are collecting their thoughts, maybe we can share, maybe Johanna, you can share the PowerPoint whilst people are thinking through some of the points, and then maybe this can drive the conversation because we really wanted to hear the speakers that are coming later. We have a speaker from the World Bank, we have the Trust Fund, and we have UN Women. We wanted them to be answering and to be responding to some of the questions that you raised. So this was essentially, this is essentially this space that we wanted you to share. So I think just to note in terms of the funding landscape, we do know that funding for anti-GBV initiatives has seen a notable rise. I think there has been a rise over the last few years with, GBV being integrated in national budgets, but the shift mostly has been in awareness because of the awareness of the social and economic costs of GBV. But at the same time, despite that, there's been fragmentation in the funding systems. The funding is fragmented, it's inadequate, it's inconsistent, and it's short-term and it's project-based, and all the changes that we want, particularly when you're looking at GBV prevention, you need long-term funding. So I'm trying to avoid to go into the solution. So I think, Johanna, if you come to the next, and I can just give just an overview in the framework of where we stand. And we do know that to address the root causes of GBV, it requires ambitious catalytic funding. We need a lot of money to do that. And it's very important for us to understand who is currently investing. And I think part of the question that Carmen raised, that we need to know that information needs to be available. Who is investing in GBV? How much are they investing? Where are they investing? And what are they investing? How much and where, so that we all know, and that can help. So I think as I'm speaking, please, if you have something to say, I'm just speaking now, whilst we wait for someone to come in. But if somebody really has something to say, you can just raise your hand and you can interrupt me and you come in. This is just to bridge the gap. Susan, yes.
Thank you, Maureen. Susan's hand is up.
Hi.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Yeah, I will be in and out, as this is a time when I have to get my daughter to school. But I think that talking about national funding for gender-based violence, I work in the extractives, and a lot of times if you're looking, it's difficult to rely on national funding, because if it's a country that owns the mineral resources, the government could be predatory. For instance, in Zimbabwe, where we work on trafficking in the diamond and gold mines, a lot of those mines are government owned. And also you could face that same predatory behavior if you are working in a country where, the UK or even US corporations are coming in and mining. So relying on national money can be very tricky, because these may be problems that governments don't want to admit to, or don't want to have seen. So I just wanted to mention that really the larger amount of funding that my nonprofit has had in the past has been from the World Bank. So at this point, I think looking at like UN or World Bank funding is really all we have left. I mean, most of my funding comes from private donors as well. So I just want to mention some of the hurdles that we face if we rely on government funding.
Susan, if you need to run for your daughter, then totally fine. But want to add on a question to that. So thank you for flagging this around national funding and how their interests can inhibit programming, but also funding opportunities. But if you look at your nonprofit and your different experiences of funding, what have you experienced as being, this sounds dramatic maybe, but safe partnerships, more equal partnerships that allow your programming to do what needs to be done? If you can maybe speak on that.
Well, I think the biggest impact was World Bank funding, because we've done a number of grants with World Bank. But then I think that's for our short-term projects, which was mentioned as well. The short-term projects are important, and we get private funding for that, which is safe because it's people, brands, small companies that are aligned with the work that we're doing. But it also, the larger corporations, most people, I think a lot of people in industry and look to large scale mining, and that's not a safe partnership. So the governments and the large scale minings it's not safe partnerships. You have to look at, smaller sponsors that are really aligned with the mission. And then, as I said, I mean, the World Bank was the most stable, long-term, effective grants that we've had.
Thank you for for sharing, Susan. I have so many questions, but let's not get bogged down maybe in too many details. I'm sure Manuel from the World Bank will be speaking later. We'll be glad to hear about your positive experiences around that. But also Marco Buemi will share with us about their public-private partnership in Italy. So I think that maybe links a bit with what you're sharing as well. Not just philanthropic funding, but these public-private partnerships and experiences with that. So thank you. Yvonne, I see your hands raised. Please speak.
Yes, thank you. It took me a while to find the hand, but I managed. No, I wanted to respond. I'm from Rutgers, a Dutch organization, a Dutch member association of IPPF. And I think in the Netherlands, we've been spoiled with a lot of funding from our government, a lot of ODA money. And currently we see a tremendous shift, amongst others, due to the war in Ukraine. We see a shift in civic space becoming less in importance to lobby and advocacy. Yeah, that's no longer seen as something important. And a very the lack of ODA leads to unclear what the amount will be for how many organizations in the years ahead. So a lot of insecurity and a big gap to fill. If you're used to big grants for longer term and suddenly these fall away, then how to make up for that gap, especially when you see that other donors in the ODA field are also reducing funding. And then, so yeah, it's a question and a struggle. Related to the national level, we are in a partnership with KPN, which is a telecom provider, in around a program on sexting, which I would say it's not big, but it's interesting and how to say that? An interesting collaboration. That's what I wanted to contribute.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. I really appreciate kind of what you're flagging here is I think we all experience it, but maybe to reiterate again, we're living in a very volatile, I would actually use the word volatile time in terms of just such quick shifts around funding, what's expected, but maybe even the attitude towards civil society and what it does. And it's sometimes a struggle to keep up. And especially if, like you said, you've been for such a long time had such strong national support from government level, to just acknowledge that. And I think how many of us in different parts of the world we're experiencing that same thing. But again, very interested in these public-private partnerships and what you're flagging around this. And I mean, responding to technology facilitated GBV, which is such a topical issue at the moment, where I sometimes feel we're playing catch up rather than being proactive. It's just developing so fast. How you're also agile in how you're seeking partnerships, but also what you're working on. So thank you for sharing on that. I want to encourage everyone in the room, take note of what's being shared. Please use the chat to reach out to one another if you want to hear more about what different commitment makers are doing in their spaces. Floor's open again. Anyone want to share what they've been experiencing, what they've been doing? Please do so.
Lisa, can I come in if there are no other hands right now? I know I have a speaking slot, but
no, if other people If other people aren't using the space, Tanya, go for it. Use
Great.
the
I mean,
space.
I wanted to follow up, on what Merlene said in terms of sort of like seeing the landscape and what it is that we are also seeing as sort of funders of EVA, GBV programming. A lot of our partners, I mean, I think most of our partners are, feminist organizations, women's rights organizations that are doing this GBV work. And as Carmen was saying, I think what we see also is a lot of different manifestations of pushback and restriction. So, for example, just last week we had a partner in Bosnia who informed us that one of the republics is now again trying to table a law that stipulates that all organizations, financially or otherwise supported by foreign donors or entities, will be subject to stricter controls and are prohibited from engaging in political activities. And their worry is this is a huge problem, as any sort of lobbying, such as advocating for improvements to the legal framework, for example, in the case of domestic violence laws, will also be considered political. So this also adds to some of the challenges that we're seeing, even when it comes to donors wanting to invest in GBV work in specific countries and contexts, that the political environment is becoming restrictive in so many different ways that the civil society partners that we are working with find themselves, it's not just now a funding gap problem, right? It's so much beyond that, and the context of the pushback against civil society writ large has a lot of impact on the way that organizations are even able to do GBV work. So I just wanted to put that out there as well, because we're trying to find, and of course these organizations are trying to, I think this is the third time that such a law has tried to be tabled, and they're of course trying to push back, but we're seeing more and more challenges that our civil society partners are facing, and they look so different in so many different parts of the world, and it all has an impact on their ability to really focus on just being able to do their GBV work. So over.
Oh, Tanya, thank you so much for raising that. I think bringing in that nuance, and when we talk about funding challenges, I think we're all very often, and it's inevitable, we speak from our positioning and kind of if I'm a civil society organization, funders do this, you're not doing, what I need, but to bring that nuance in how funders are also being challenged by this changing landscape. And I'm again hearing just how challenging at state level this whole space is being made in different ways. So thank you so much for raising that nuance, Tanya. I really appreciate that. We have about 2 minutes left. I really want to encourage all of the commitment makers in the room. Use this space if you want to flag something, if you want to ask something, if there's something you would want our speakers to respond to. Please do so. Preeti, I see your hands up.
Yes, I found a hand.
Hello.
Hi. So quickly, I completely resonate with Tanya, and full disclaimer, as a SWRI, we do not see ourselves as donors really. We are more of the ham in the sandwich between donors and people who get it. But I completely agree with you, Tanya, because there are so many restrictions where we cannot make grants, although we know that there is complete dearth of evidence. There is nothing on the ground over there. And, it's a beautiful partnership that needs support. The laws of the country just don't allow you. But we also currently facing issues with grants that we've already made, because some of our grantees are finding it extremely hard to continue their work because of the situation they find themselves in, rollback of rights, women's rights, criminalization of minority women. So it's not just making the grant, it's also then supporting people who continue doing their work on the ground. That also has been a challenge. I think I just wanted to call out that it's like a full cycle.
Thank you so much for that, Preeti. And I really appreciate that we're I feel like this is kind of set us up for for a nuanced discussion with our experts from different organizations, where we really maybe this is highlighting to us that let's discuss these issues around funding as we're all in this together, both funders and those seeking funders. We're all in this really challenging setting and context, and dynamically changing and challenging context together. I think that's a great way to go into our discussions now. So I'm going to ask our first two speakers. I'm just going to quickly introduce them. So we have two speakers that'll start us off. So how we're going to do it: two speakers, then a Q&A session, then again two speakers and Q&A, and then a final session in Q&A. So with our first two, Tanya, you've heard, Tanya Ghani is a GBV specialist, and she has more than a decade of professional experience in gender equality and ending violence against women programming. So in a previous role as the grants and program manager for the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women, she was responsible for leading and executing the Trust Fund's grant-making strategy and managing about $45 million US grants portfolio. She's here today in her position as Deputy Chief of the UN Trust Fund. And Tanya, we're delighted that you can be here. And then our second speaker in this session is Manuel Contreras Urbina. He's the Global Lead Gender-Based Violence at the World Bank. He's also a gender specialist with over 20 years of national and international experience in gender and reproductive health and research and programming. So before he joined the World Bank, he was Director of Research at the George Washington University Global Women's Institute. He's been at the World Bank for almost 5 years, first in his role of Senior Social Development Specialist, and now as Global Lead for GBV. So how we're doing this, Tanya, I'm handing over to you, and then directly after Tanya, Manuel, if you can speak. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. Again, good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Just as we get started for the Q&A session, I'm not sure if everyone in the room is necessarily familiar with the Trust Fund. So I wanted to give a bit of an overview about the Trust Fund, our work, and who we are and what we do. So as many of you know, the Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women was established in 1996 by UN member states, and it was a direct outcome of the historic landmark really momentum that was generated by the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. And today it remains the only UN-wide funding mechanism that is dedicated exclusively to providing direct grants to civil society organizations that are working to prevent and end all forms of violence against women and girls. Next slide, please. So for nearly 3 decades, we've been providing funding through open calls for proposals to more than 700 women's rights and civil society organizations across 140 countries and territories. And we've seen firsthand through visiting our partners, through them really being able to document their work, how their interventions have really transformed the lives of millions of women and girls by providing life-saving support to survivors, challenging harmful gender norms, and really starting to lead prevention work in some of their communities, as well as advocating for inclusive legal reforms and so much more. Next slide, please. In terms of our grant-making approach, it's really rooted in the recognition that women's rights organizations and civil society organizations are really the experts in their own contexts, and therefore they're best positioned to drive meaningful and lasting change in their own communities. So guided by this principle, we really prioritize funding to women-led organizations as well as constituent-led organizations. This includes small organizations and those that are really working at the community level with women and girls at heightened risk of violence and discrimination. And over the years, we've really tried to adapt our funding model through a sort of a listening and learning experience with our grantee partners. For example, when we started off almost 30 years ago, we were giving 1 to 2 million, 2-year grants. Starting last year, we have, increased our grant duration for all our partners for 4 years. Again, going back to what Maureen was saying, that GBV work in communities takes time and it requires really reliable funding. And we're hoping, this is sort of our first year with 4-year partners, and we don't want to really necessarily stop here. Our goal is to try to see if we can continue to sort of push the needle and see how long we can support the same partner to really implement their strategies, but also to strengthen their own long-term resilience. And beyond financial support, we see ourselves as a partner that is really there to provide wraparound support and services to our grantee organizations. So we offer tailored capacity exchanges, or bringing up our partners together so that they can learn from each other. We provide technical accompaniment, supporting them with their results frameworks, indicators, evaluations, and also provide dedicated resources for self and collective care, which is something we really instituted during the COVID-19 pandemic and has continued. Again, as we see the world becoming more and more complex and fragile, we've tried to also institute additional funding budget lines for our partners, such as a contingency budget line, so that they have the resources to really be able to adapt when crisis hits, or in cases where they have some sort of a funding gap where they may need to tap into this contingency budget allocation. And we're really hoping that this sort of comprehensive support really ensures that our grantee partners can also sustain the critical work beyond the duration of the trust fund grant. We also invest in practice-based knowledge and collective learning. We have, through strategic assessments, the co-creation of knowledge products with our grantee partners, through our open evaluation library, as well as the Shine Hub that you may hear about a little later, or you may be familiar with already. We're really trying to foster a global platform where CSOs, researchers, policymakers, as well as donors can really connect, collaborate, and really exchange practice-based knowledge and strategies really to accelerate progress in ending violence against women and girls. And at the Trust Fund, again, we, as a sort of grant-making mechanism, we really have witnessed firsthand how adequate multi-year and flexible funding, on the one hand, empowers women's rights and civil society organizations, but on the flip side, right, what a dearth in funding there really is to support the programs that apply for funding to us in any given year. So for example, in response to our last call for proposals, which we launched in 2024, we received funding requests totaling around 1.5 billion, but we were only able to allocate 16 million in grants. More broadly, right, we know that 0.1% of official ODA reaches women's rights organizations directly, and this is something that we are really trying to work with other donors and funders as a global community of grant makers to sort of push in terms of advocacy to expand funding opportunities and to really ensure that women's rights and CSOs are adequately resourced, not only to support the GBV interventions, as I was saying earlier, but also to build the organizational resilience, to have the resources, to advocate for policy change, and to be institutionally strong in order to be able to drive long-term systemic impact. And we see today's opportunity really as a valuable space to exchange insights on funding processes, identify entry points for deeper collaborations, hear from others on what they're seeing as challenges, but also opportunities when it comes to being able to support civil society and women's rights organizations with more inclusive and sustainable funding. So with that, Alisa, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll also drop some links in the chat where you, where those who are interested can learn a little bit more about our latest work.
Thank you so
Lisa.
much, Tanya. I just wanted to ask, please, can you share some links? And you already preempted that. Thank you so much, Tanya. Manuel, I'm going to hand over to you immediately, please.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And first, I want to acknowledge the challenges that we are facing now as a field, as a community, but also these are more, I would say, strong or acute for those who work in the civil society, women's rights organizations. So just I wanted to say that first. Second, well, in terms of how the World Bank operates, you probably know most of our work is through governments. So that is has like pros and cons, as everything in life. Sometimes more cons than pros, but sometimes more pros in terms of like opportunities to scale up things and projects. The work of GBV, gender-based violence in general, is divided in two parts. One is, and the way that the World Bank started working on gender-based violence in a more systematic way, like around, I would say, almost 10 years ago, probably less than that, 8, was through safeguarding. So basically to put in place mechanisms to reduce the risks of sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment within our projects, our lending projects to governments. So that means that at activities to mitigate risk of sexual exploitation, abuse, sexual harassment had to be in place in all the institutions that are involved in any kind of World Bank project. A lot of these World Bank projects, what I'm talking about is not projects that are gender projects. I'm talking about infrastructure projects, education projects, health projects, etc. So when I'm saying about covers all the different people who work in the project, means the client, that is the government and the ministry, whoever is doing the implementation of the project, and then the contractors are subcontractors, can be companies, can be private sector, etc. What are these mechanisms to reduce risk? Is establish code of conduct, but also where the civil society comes into the support is in trainings to all the staff and having mapping of the services available in case there are incidents reported, not only for women, but also in terms of child protection. And in some places where we are doing some work, for example, in transport projects, where in rural areas where there are no services available, sometimes, or the idea is that, or at least the mandate in terms of our safeguarding guidelines, is to put in place some services available in their locations. So that's a work that fortunately is growing, is mandatory, and I don't see any kind of like big, I would say, change of that work in the at least short middle term. And in many cases, the civil society provides the support to that, but how to engage that depends on the ground. That depends on the World Bank country office and the project leader that is leading the project. Again, the challenge here is to connect to that people, because that people can be someone who is expert in water, expert in energy, not necessarily expert in gender. In most of cases, they hire people who are gender experts who support that, or in some countries, we have what we call gender platforms, where there is like some kind of staff in the country office dedicated to gender issues, including sometimes gender-based violence. The second one, that's one work. The second one is to try to support mainly the clients, again, the government, but not all the time is the government, but mainly the government in incorporate gender-based violence activities in our lending operations, prevention and response beyond the safeguard work. So basically, if the ministry, in all the different sectors, so the advantage is that we just don't work in the typical sectors of health, education, social protection. We work in all the different ones. So what we try is that our best practices that we know of gender-based violence are incorporated in schools, in health clinics, in cash transfer programs, in transport programs to reduce sexual harassment in public spaces, etc., etc. So we work in a variety of sectors, topics, and we pass in 8 years, I would say, from 30 operations that have GBV activities to more than 400. Most of them are in terms of services in health, but goes beyond that, as I mentioned before. So now, how does that work? The funding goes to the government. They are the ones who receive the funding to implement a program, and then they potentially implement it themselves, or they hire an organizations or one or several to implement the program. I can give you an example. In Liberia, the government is implementing SASA, the well-known SASA, at national level for first time. We, with World Bank's project, as a World Bank, we discuss with the client, that is the Ministry of Women, the need of hire a civil society organization to do this work, because the government not necessarily have the whole capacity to do this work. They hire Plan International with the support from of Raising Voices to do this work. So in collaboration with both, they are implementing SASA at national level. That's just one example. Another example, for example, in Tanzania, they are doing this parenting program that Equimundo has, Bandar Bajer, or I don't know, I never know how to say that, but this program P, care, parenting, all that kind of stuff, also almost at national level. So there are ways to and what the bank does is usually, again, have conversations with the government to advise them to partner with the civil society. And I know that I'm running out of time. I just want to end saying that there are also sometimes that the World Bank implements projects directly that doesn't go through lending projects. There are other ways, and that again depends on the country level, where some experts in gender or GBV have the opportunity, or get through a trust fund or through the country office, to get some resources to implement directly, so that again it's not lending, it's direct funding for implementation that usually is programmatic or knowledge. In that implementation, it can be a variety of funding but can be meaningful. And in that, the bank has much more, I would say, ability to implement and hire whoever we want, basically. And I can give you an example. In Bolivia, we've been working already for 5 years with an organization that is called CIES, that does comprehensive sexual education, that is part of FOS Feminista, or in the past IPPF, West Hemisphere or something like that. And we've been working with them because we got like a trust fund, and we've been directly implementing comprehensive sexual education programs through these organizations. So there are ways, there are mechanisms. We not sure what is going to happen in the future because as we are, we are all struggling with the challenges that are, but here we are, the more we can to continue supporting this field.
Thank you so much, Manuel. And something that really kind of struck me in listening to what you're explaining around how the World Bank engages is the importance then at country level of the relationship between civil society and government, which we know that, but just really emphasizing that again. Thank you so much, Manuel. People, it's open floor. Any questions that you have to Manuel or to Tanya? I really want to encourage you to use this opportunity. If I look in the chat box, Yvonne, where is your comment? Yvonne said just after Tanya's presentation, the ratio between requested funding and the amount available is an example of the dire need for funding. And yes, that was such a striking, in a sad way, that slide. And then I see also Keturah raised in the chat. In Nigeria, it is so political when it comes to the grassroots organization being considered for partnership with the government to implement a World Bank project. Giving the funding directly to grassroots organizations will be more effective. And then someone from their iPhone says it's the same in Senegal and in many West African countries. If maybe, Manuel, you can speak a bit to that challenge around, and I mean, take this wherever you want to take it, but for civil society organizations, how to navigate this? Any thoughts from your side?
Well, unfortunately, the thing is that we don't have many instruments, financial instruments, that allows us to do that, unfortunately. And that's how the work is. I mean, for most of the cases, we need to go through the governments. Again, we have sometimes the opportunity to advise them, and we are trying more and more to advise them about the importance to collaborate and partner with civil rights organizations. But at the end, most of these projects are lending projects. That means that, I mean, they are the ones who decide, right? Again, there are other types of financing that are not as big as that ones, but that we manage some internal trust funds or what we call it bank budget that is usually managed by the country offices where we are able to directly implement in that way, and also the safeguard work. In that ones, we are able to partner with civil society organizations. We have many examples. It's not like it never happens. I know that it can be challenging, and would say, like, maybe there are not many examples as we would like to, but there are. We've been partnering with, like, the ones I mentioned, and we've been partnering directly with civil society in many countries. But I understand that it's not easy. We are actually trying now to develop a specific whole mechanism to do that direct work. But of course, we start doing that before all this new context. And as you can imagine now, it's a little bit like not advancing as much as we would like to. But that's the other thing. In some places, especially in FCV settings, we partner directly with the UN system. Like, for example, we have a close collaboration with Spotlight. We have some partnership with UNICEF. And then through them, then when the funds go through them, then they are open to partner with whoever they want. So sometimes, and there are some projects we have realized that goes through the UN system or other organizations that end that the programmatic work end in civil society, but people don't know that is World Bank initial funding, because go through two different channels that at the end is not necessarily very or we is reported in that way. But there are several mechanisms there. Unfortunately, we don't have more, but we have a new gender strategy that we are, again, the idea is to strengthen our collaboration with the civil society. We have no doubt about the importance on that. Again, the problem now that we are facing is the problem that we are all facing, and that is touching the entire field. But we'll see. We will keep going. That's the message we have received.
But Manuel, thank you so much for responding on that, and also I think flagging that you are working towards, I mean, within the current system, but that towards more direct funding to civil society. Marlene, before I come to you, I just want to bring Tanya in on this. So Tanya, in my understanding, with the trust fund, there's a very intentional funding of civil society and specifically women's rights organizations. So if you can maybe speak a bit to that, and also, I know it wasn't that way originally 30 years ago. What was the process for, I think, politically bringing this shift to saying the trust fund is prioritizing funding this space? If you can maybe speak to that, please.
I can go on all day, but I'll try to keep it to maybe 2 to 3 minutes. Yes, I mean, I think, as you alluded, when we started really as, established as a fund, we were funding, governments and civil society. In the middle, before the financial crisis of 2010, we were also funding UN country teams. But through our own assessments and evaluations, we found that, on the one hand, we also got the biggest bang for our buck by investing in civil society partners, less bureaucracy, more time to actually implement interventions, easier to really see what the results are on the ground. And then over time, also just in terms of the value, or in terms of the dollar amount we were giving, is not, as significant, perhaps, right? In terms of the overall dollar amount, say that the World Bank is able to really provide in countries and to governments, et cetera, as well. So that was one reason, from just purely a results perspective, also for us to say, we're seeing our funding yields higher or better returns in the 2 to 3 year period if we directly invest through civil society partners. But also, as I said, I think we really were founded, following the Beijing Platform for Action as a UN system response to the voices of feminist or organizers, right, saying that we need more resources to go into the hands of women's rights organizations or civil society organizations. So I think for us, the deliberate shift was saying that is now sort of really the primary and driving focus of the trust fund since our last strategic plan. So I would say since 2020 to 2021, that we've really only focused on supporting civil society organizations, but then increasingly within that, our focus has become more on supporting smaller organizations as well as women's rights and women-led organizations. And for us, I think, as I had alluded to as well, one of the, as we see some of these challenges emerging with the restrictions, with the pushback, with the sort of shrinking civil space, the fact that we are a pooled funding mechanism enables us to have a little bit more flexibility than maybe other traditional donors can. So for example, if it takes 6 months to a year for a partner in Yemen or Nepal to get registered, we can take that time, right? We can say, what, it's fine. Your project will start a year later, but you'll still have 4 years, which is in some instances not necessarily available to all partners. And as I said, we're seeing in Mexico, we have a partner whose, her bank account was frozen. It's been a year and a half since they've been able to implement their project. But, the support we can provide as a fund to these organizations is to just provide the reassurance and say, you know, we'll wait. We'll wait until you're able to sort this out, because we have, in a way, the ability to do that. For us, the challenge is really the resources, like it is for women's rights organizations. If we had more resources, we'd be able to fund more organizations and find those ways, right, to be able to then also take this up to our own donors and say that you will see the impact and the results of these partners. It's just going to take longer because of the setbacks that they're seeing in their own contexts.
Thank you so much for that, Tanya. I'm gonna pause, Marlene. Your hand's up, but now, because I know you really well, I'm gonna tell you, it needs to be quick because we need to move on to our next session. Marlene.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, Lisa. So I think my question was to Manuel. At what point, under what conditions, I think, would the bank give conditionalities when they negotiate the development loan with the country? I think I had heard last year that I think it's Liberia, I think, where the bank put in some conditions around a law on FGM, on the ending with FGM. So under what conditions is there, because I'm trying to think of opportunities where civil society can lobby the bank or can advocate the bank to be then able to put in these conditions when they are negotiating the development loan. That was the first point. Then the second point, I think this is maybe food for thought for civil society organizations. In many of the countries, a lot of the gender work is with the Ministry of Gender, and that's the least funded ministry in literally almost all governments. And what Lisa mentioned before, that relationship, to really build a strong relationship with the Ministry of Gender, because oftentimes they don't have the expertise that civil society has. So if you're coming to a situation where civil society comes in with the expertise and Ministry of Gender can access the funding by virtue of them being in government, is that a relationship that would probably be worth pursuing? Because I think the Ministry of Gender also do want the minister, whoever the minister would also be, be making inroads with their constituency, showing that they are actually working for women. So would this be a win-win situation? And it's a matter of, I think, finding some way, even in West Africa, where you mentioned that it's difficult to work with government, but finding some way to reach Ministry of Gender as an entry point, that whatever is good for women, civil society organizations is in fact good for Ministry of Gender, because then they get to deliver for the women that they are supposedly supposed to be representing. So over to you. I hope it takes so much time. Thanks.
Thanks, Molin. I think they are great points. The first one, yes, sometimes the project leaders and the country office are have this negotiation with of what to include in the loans, and to address some particular topics. That again depends specifically that whole thing goes at the national level. We don't have necessarily, I mean, we have some mandatory things that, I mean, of course, we have some mechanism and guidelines of what the bank requires when there is a loan. Of course, it's not necessarily, in general, what is related to environmental and social framework that we have, basically our safeguard guidelines. In that guidelines, sometimes, and that guidelines include all the mitigation of risk of sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment within the project. However, the guidelines do not cover like, oh, the government needs to partner with civil society, or the government needs to address this particular topic. That's not like that. It's that is more at the negotiation again with the country level, with the specific client. And as you say, in many cases, the client is not the Ministry of Gender. Actually, I would say in most of cases it's not. It can be in the work on gender-based violence, I would say is mainly the Ministry of Health first. And second, probably the Ministry of Social Development, and third, Ministry of Education. potentially. But also the wherever is the Ministry of Transport or things like that. So I think that I would say the main sectors. So, and at the end, the final approval is through the Ministry of Finance. So that's another like thing that the World Bank is in a somehow advantage position with the government, that we have access to all these different sectors, dialogue with all these different ministers that have potentially more resources than the Ministry of Gender. But again, that is in the negotiation directly with them. Of course, the ideal situation is that, and again, it has happened, is that during the negotiation part or phase of the loan, there is already like some kind of dialogue between the task team leaders who are negotiating that loan and women's rights organizations, because to provide these inputs to bring to the government about what to address and how to address that. And then potentially that ends into some conditions to the loan. But again, we don't have necessarily established guidelines to do that.
Thank you so much.
It's a lot,
oh,
sorry,
Manu.
just to say, it's a lot about, I would say, coordination also, like how this, and things a lot, coordination at local level, about how the people of education talk to the people of gender, or the people, you know what I mean, is in that way. It's a lot of that connections that happen more at the country level, and not just the federal government. I also want to say that sometimes the loans go to local governments.
Thank you so much, Manuel. I'm a bit conscious of time, so I want to move over to our next set of speakers, but I want to ask both Manuel and Tanya if you can respond on the chat. There seems to be a bit confusion. The World Bank has trust funds, and that's not the same as the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. So Tanya and Manuel, if you can just respond on the chat, please. Thank you so much to Manuel and Tanya. I think you've just raised so many things for us to think about and be conscious of. Manuel, also, if you can maybe post some links in the chat about how you've been funding and those civil society grants that you were referring to. But we're going to move over to our next two speakers. The first is Preeti, who we saw earlier. So Preeti Bragugati, she's the Director, Grants Management and Impact at SVRI. So that's the Sexual Violence Research Initiative. She's a social development specialist and professional with expertise in research and evaluation and the provision of technical support all around gender and violence against women and sexual health. So before she joined SVRI, she was the global lead for impact and evidence at the International Planned Parenthood Federation. But she's here today with her SVRI hats, and although she said they don't see themselves as grant makers, she'll maybe share a bit about their grant making portfolio. Manuel also flagged in the chat that SVRI and World Bank partnered for a while around small grants. So Preeti will be sharing, and then Moline, our own Moline, will be sharing it around UN Women's Act and the grant making that's coming from there. But for now, Preeti, I'm handing over to you, please.
Thank you, Lisa. And if I am speaking too much, feel free to interject and say your time is up. Because I don't have a PowerPoint today, and usually PowerPoints keep me on track. So freeform is a bit difficult for me. So hi, everybody, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to come here and speak to all of you. This clarification, when I said I don't see, SVRI doesn't see itself as grant makers. No, we definitely are grant makers. We are not funders in the most typical sense, because we aggregate funds from everywhere else and then put it together and then make grants. So just a minor change. Again, I must not assume that everybody knows about SVRI. So quickly, who we are. So SVRI is the largest network on research on violence against women and violence against children, including researchers, practitioners, donors, activists, and policymakers across the globe. We are a field building network and we support and fund evidence building and generation. We also gather, curate, distill, and disseminate evidence and knowledge, provide spaces to facilitate knowledge exchange, to develop innovative evidence-based programming to prevent and respond to violence against women and violence against children in low-middle income countries. We are committed by providing research grants, which we have been doing since 2014, to researchers and organizations in the low and middle income countries since 2014. A typical feature of our grant is that the grant comes along with bespoke training, technical accompaniments, facilitating knowledge exchanges between grantees and other stakeholders. The other thing that everybody knows about SVRI is the SVRI Forum, which is the world's, we like to believe it's the world's biggest convening for feminists, researchers to meet, practitioners to meet, activists to meet, and exchange latest evidence on violence against women and violence against children, both prevention and response. So with that very short elevator speech, actually I was quite confused. When you opened the floor, it all looked so glum. I was like, oh my God, I'm feeling so sad. Here I have my notes and what am I going to say now? But briefly about the SVRI grant. SVRI follows an annual grant making cycle. SVRI doesn't have funds of its own from which it makes grants. What it does is, I don't know the aggregate is the correct word, but we collect funds from various donors, put them in a pot. And because we also see ourselves as a grant maker, that imbibes feminist principles in grant making and truly believe in ethical grant making. It's not just about collecting money in a pot and then giving it off, but this requires a lot of negotiation. And today I'm going to talk to all of you a bit about that. So as I said, we've been in the business of grant making for the past 10 years, or this is our 11th year. Our funding is such that many of you, if you have applied to the SVRI grants, it is never tied to a thematical area because we believe, first of all, less than 1% of funding globally is going towards violence against women. Even a smaller proportion of that is going to research on violence against women. So we do not want to dictate thematic areas for people on the ground who are understanding where the evidence gaps are, who know what needs to be prioritized, right? To be able to apply to SVRI and say that this is what we need in our context. This is how we're going to do research. While doing that, we are hopefully doing enough that we are allowing people to speak in their own voices and slowly but surely challenge the knowledge hierarchy that is set in the Western system. So we are increasingly supporting proposals that are doing participatory research, more qualitative research. And one of our biggest criteria is that we do not entertain applications from applicants that are high income based countries or high income based institutions or groups. All our grants are strictly given to organizations that are low income based groups. We want to support more and more women's rights organizations, women-led organizations. As a donor, we want to, as a grant maker, when giving grants, we follow a few steps in our mind where we try to understand how can we work through the various steps of grant making in a way that does not dictate the agenda of the donors who gave us funds to give you grants first. Secondly, we are not the people who set the research agenda. I will put the links later in chat, but I'm sure a lot of you might be aware that SVRI has facilitated to date about 7 separate research priority setting processes, which is basically on a crowdsourced methodology called CHINRI, which collects in a consensus building method research priorities that practitioners, researchers, activists, and women on the ground feel need to be prioritized. And that forms the research agenda that we publish. And we are working very actively with donors to take that research agenda into account while deciding what to fund for research, so that money is invested where it has the maximum impact in terms of generating evidence where there is weak evidence, and then, in short, evidence that can help advocacy, evidence that can help better programs, evidence that can help better policies. So I think we've done okay so far, because since 2014 to 2025, and I think this is where I'll bring a little bit, Lisa, what we were talking at the beginning, is we've seen a shift in the pool of donors that come to us now, right? So right from the beginning up to recent times, donors would give us funds, not saying that you should make 5 grants to adolescent girls or SRHR only from our money. They would give money to us and say that you've shared research agendas, you have your ethical funding principles in place, we trust you. But we've seen that shifting of late. We're seeing that shift slowly and gradually, where donors are coming to SVRI saying, can we make grants specific to X? And can we make grants specific to Y only? And there are several instances where we had to push back, negotiate, educate, even funders to say that this is probably the only pot of money, apart from what my predecessors have mentioned, the UN and the World Bank, who, by the way, doesn't have those beautiful grants anymore. There are not many research monies out there, really. So that is one part of the story that the SVRI keeps dealing at the back end all the time. With regards to the actual call for proposals, it's programs is one level and research is on a separate plane. Because of the legacy of colonization, research is often seen as an exclusive piece of work that only few people with expertise sitting in northern countries, right? Most of the time, certain skin color are experts at. And not just that, a few methodologies are better than the rest. So while we are managing funders at one end, saying that you cannot dictate the agendas, we have co-created agendas and people on the ground understand these better. SVRI also believes in capacity strengthening of the field itself. So typical SVRI grants, even before we make the grant, when we announce our grant, we typically have at least 2 webinars where there is some form of training that we give to the field, which is open to applicants. We offer technical accompaniments to people when the grants are working. In the current environment, as I said in the beginning, we've really, I think, being tested where we've had to be flexible since the time of COVID, where we had to change research design because things on the ground just change. For example, in Sri Lanka, after the economic impact, stakeholders changed completely. So I think we're learning as we are going that talking about feminist principles and practicing them is a lifelong process. And I think I rest my case. If there are any questions, I will come to that.
Thank you so much, Preeti. I want to ask you if you could maybe, if there are relevant links, post in the chat for people who want more information on this.
Absolutely.
But I'm going to hand over now immediately to Marlene. And Marlene, your time is being cut so dramatically, so that we still have time for Q&A, please.
Okay. All right. No, that's fine. I will just speak just briefly a minute or two to the ACT program. I think some of you have heard about the Advocacy, Coalition Building and Transformative Feminist Action Program that UN Women is implementing, funded by the EU. The only reason we brought it in is that they also had a meeting sometime last year in Nairobi, also looking at funding in women's rights organizations. So I will just speak to like 5 recommendations, which I think have also been raised. I think when Tanya was speaking, she mentioned some of this in terms of what the funders are already looking at as recommendations that came out from that meeting. So I think one of the first recommendations was to increase direct funding for women's rights organizations, because we do know this is where most of the work is being done. And the request also that donors simplify the funding mechanisms and allocate more direct flexible funds. The issue of flexibility was really coming out quite strong. And then also the long-term commitment from donors that these short-term grants oftentimes don't have the impact or the change. It's difficult to see a change in prevention in GBV within a year. And so long-term funding is really something, and I'm glad the trust fund was already, Tanya already mentioned that this is something that they're already looking at in certain areas and in certain countries. And then trust-based funding approaches, reducing the burden on CSO, so also trying to find some flexible way of reporting. I think we have had instances where civil society organizations have asked us as commitment makers that even as you arrange meetings for us, you must also take cognizance of the fact that we are grassroots organizations that are based in rural areas. So our connection is sometimes very difficult. And then also increasing investments in women's rights, in women's movements, support for women with disabilities, to ensure that even as funders put out this call for proposals, there is that caveat to indicate that, you know, a certain percentage or a certain proportion, or at least there should be specific needs of women living with disabilities also being engaged. And then lastly, the ethical frameworks for research funding, which Preeti was just speaking to, which SVRI already adheres to. So I will stop here so that we'll hear something more interesting, I think, from the next speaker from Marco. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Marlene. We're going to pause the Q&A and have a joint one at the end. And I want to immediately hand over to Marco. Marco Buemi is a senior expert, presidency of the Council of Ministers, Department for Equal Opportunities, Office for International and General Affairs in Italy. So he will be sharing with us a best practice public-private partnership they have to address violence against women and girls. And this is a partnership between government, banks, and civil society organizations. And I think that's a great way for us to have a concrete example of how civil society, how we can explore non-traditional funding models. So Marco, if you're there.
Yes, you see me?
Please.
Hi,
Hi, there you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, to introduce me. And thank you, Marlene, to give us the possibility to present this best practice. Actually, will be also published in the booklet. So the people that is interested to understand more and to go deeper in the issue, yeah, I recommend to read it carefully than the presentation in the booklet that will be out soon, actually. We talk here about violence against women. We talk about domestic and economic violence that usually happens and is very important and very pervasive issue in Italy at this moment. The statistics say so, and unfortunately, becoming a really a big issue for the government as well. Women victims find themselves in poverty usually with limited resources when they get in this violence process. There is a lack of opportunities. Usually they have a really limited resources because they don't work, so they don't have an income, and this is the crucial issue often for the woman that has been in this violence circuit. And so the problem is the social and economic independence. So we wanted to struggle this real point of the independence of women victim of violence. In particular, women with children are more affected because they have to take care of the children as well. So the income, I think, will double for them, and the possibility not to provide a digital life for them is really an issue, and they struggle day by day with this possibility to have financial independence. So if I come in reality to the good practice, what we call the freedom income is the translation of reddito of libertà, called in Italian, is a law that was in act from 2020 actually. So it's already a few years ago that has been in act. But what I have to say, the current government, after an experimental phase, made this law structural, increasing also the budget, okay, the income budget per woman, okay. The law aims to strengthen victim protection in prevention, firstly. Secondly, in economic support, that is the most important part. And third, in specialized training for judicial authorities, okay? Because they have to recognize the different situation of women that are in need of this freedom income. So it's important the recognition of the woman that ask for this particular support. The goal is, of course, to offer immediate economic relief, first of all, and the most important part is to foster financial independence. I can come with some numbers because you can have this idea then what we talk about. The application, of course, of this freedom and income go through a national social structure through the municipality where the woman is resident. Okay, so they go through local offices in all the country. We talk about 10 millions of budget of resources 2025 2027 10 million euro. We talk about euro. From 2028 they extended this structural support to 6 million per year onwards. Okay, so this is quite consistent budget to scale up with this particular instrument. If we talk about statistic, we supported 3,000 women during 2024, okay? And we gave to every woman 400 per month. This 400 per month has been increased 100 from 2025. So from January 2025, we give 400 plus 100, that's mean 500 per month, okay? And this is a support, usually that starts as a yearly support, and then we see the situation, if the woman has been, relieved in part or totally, and then we can continue the year after to give this extension of income. What I want to add to finish my presentation is that we also improve another mechanism that is called Freedom Microcredit Project that is connected, of course, with this freedom income. This Freedom Microcredit Project talk about financial aid, but also to give loans and microcredit to women that want to start to be an entrepreneur, for example. So this is very important. If I give you some statistic also related to microcredit initiative, as followed the microcredit initiative, 341 women, and so they gave the access to microcredit. For 58 of them, they started a part of microcredit and entrepreneurial activities. So they started an own company, actually, thanks to this, mechanism. And 283, they benefit from social initiative that's enabling them to embark economic emancipation. So very important. So this initiative has been potentially significant for replication, I think, across other regions of Italy, but also other countries in Europe. So I think it's something that can be worth to give a look and try to understand if it can work also in your country. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your floor.
Oh, Marco, thank you so much. Everyone, you'll see in the chat, Marlene posted that Marco's story is shared in the 16 Impact Stories for 16 Days booklet that was shared end of last year. And that booklet's going to be republished by the end of this month, and it has the full story. But also, please reach out to Marco.
Yeah,
So I am very bad at managing these things because I really start listening, and then I find it so interesting that I find it difficult to ask people to wrap up. But we're going to have like a tiny little Q&A. So if anyone has any questions for Marco or for Preeti, you can use the chat. I'm looking out for questions there, but someone, Marco, is asking, sorry, it says iPhone. That is very interesting. Thank you so much, Marco. But do you have an impact report about the women helped? Do you have maybe links or information that you can share, please?
No, actually, what's the numbers that I gave you? I can write down. Actually, no problem. I can prepare a slide to share with you. That's the number from 2024 when I was talking about we gave support to 3,000 women, and we gave the possibility to 341 women to go to the microcredit line. That is our report. I prepared this report just for this conference. I mean, for this panel.
Okay.
So yeah.
Thank you. But I also want to encourage everyone to take a look at the 16 days booklet that was prepared with a full story. I also want to encourage you to take a look at the chat. Preeti posted a number of links around grants, research grants at SVRI, their priorities for research, lots of different things. So please take a look. I'm checking. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. But if anyone wants to raise their hand, please do so. This time, I'm not going to give so much space. If I'm not seeing hands, we're going to. Oh, I see there. Ketura, do you want to unmute yourself, please?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate this moment. Well, mine is still a concern, an issue of the grant, most especially those of us that are doing much work at the grassroots. The competition for these grants are very, very high, and we struggle actually to secure those grants. So, but what my concern is looking at the members of the Action Coalition here. I'm seeing just few. I don't know if I'm not even the only one from Nigeria, but when it comes to grants, I do see people that are not even engaged with are not even committed with gender-based violence are the one winning those grants. And well, it's becoming actually a very difficult one for us that are really, really doing the work at the grassroots. And our challenge is mostly we see organizations that are not even doing more are the ones really securing grants than those that are actually doing the work. So I don't know if UN Women has any consideration, since you already know your members and you know the work they are doing, and at the end of the day, well, my fear is seeing other people that are not even connected doing much work securing those grants. So mine is just a concern, and to share a concern.
Thank you for
Yes.
sharing that, Ketura. Moline, I think I'm gonna ask you, with your various hats that you're wearing, if you can maybe respond to what Ketura has flagged, this situation that I think is not unique maybe to Nigeria, but also if you can respond. Yvonne posted in the chat, if you can say anything about ACT criteria and what the current status is, like is a new grant cycle coming up. If you can respond to those things, and then maybe also share your final key messages and close for us. So a bunch of things being handed over to you, Moline, if you can do that, please.
All right. Thanks a lot, Lisa, and thanks everyone. For Yvonne, as far as I know, unfortunately, Gertrude had to leave. She manages the ACT program within the African region. So they're funding Africa and Latin America mostly. I know there was a call last year, and unfortunately which is one of the reasons I'd asked Gertrude to be on this call, they had made a call last year and they had re-advertised it 3 times for a commitment maker from GBV. And that's why I wanted to come in and speak on, what was the issue in terms of the responses that were coming forward. But what I know now, they've engaged all the partners and they're giving the grants to organizations that are working on a regional basis. So they're not country grants, so to speak. So it's organizations that are working regionally. So within Eastern and Southern Africa, there's an organization that is working within the region. And then within West Africa, it's an organization that is working within the region to strengthen women's rights movements and advocacy for women and build and strengthen the women's rights movement within the sections and also within Latin America. I will ask Gertrude for more information and I can share in terms of more detail. And I'll also check if it's okay to share their annual report because I think they've done their annual report for the ACT program and I can share that. Yes, and the link for CSW, I think Johanna will share the link again for you, Ketura. And then in terms of closing, really thank you everyone for attending. I think I have 4 points. The first point in terms of the key messages and the emerging issues is that need to strengthen the relationships with the in-country gender machinery. Even with all the politics, I still think that one entry point for us is with the Ministry of Gender within the country where you are in, to work with the Ministry of Gender, find a way to get through to them because I think they have that inroads. One of the things, I didn't want to share my presentation. I think I will share the link with the notes. One of the things we have discovered last year is a lot of funding for GBV is actually through member states. So there's a huge opportunity to engage member states one way or the other to find out where is the money within the member state, within the countries, in what ministries are they putting the money, and in what opportunities do we have to influence and to work with those specific ministries. Because a lot of the money that we saw, according to the accountability report last year, a lot of it is member states that are actually pledging and spending money for GBV. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to translate to then CSOs working in the country. So we need to find a way to understand that, and we're trying to engage now member states to have a strategic engagement with member states to really understand where exactly, in what ministries or in what sectors they are putting the money for GBV so that we can influence that better. Then the second point is, again, one of the things we have seen when it comes to mobilizing resources is the lack of evidence. We need to generate evidence. And I think SVRI, that grant...
I'm still afraid to English.
Oh, sorry.
Tina, if you can maybe mute yourself, sorry.
Okay.
Please continue, Molly.
All right. So within, I think SVRI research grants offer that opportunity to generate evidence. With the work that we are doing, that grant mechanism, the research grant, I think provides that opportunity to then generate evidence based on the work that you're doing. Because I think most of the grants for the program work sometimes does not come with research grants, and then SVRI, I think, comes in with that if we're following the research priorities that have been set. Thirdly, exploring within countries the private sector, the public-private sector partnerships. For Italy, I think it was the government that was the driving force. We can, I think, if there's some way to explore within the countries, engage private sector. Some of the private sector organizations we have and the commitment makers and the leaders have indicated that they do have the funding, and sometimes it's a bit difficult to figure out. So you find sometimes they are doing the work by themselves, and yet the expertise again is sitting with civil society and bringing them together, which then comes to the last point, which Ketura mentioned, the commitment makers in the country coming together is a collective in driving the priorities. I know with the UN, for UN organizations, normally it's easier to then come in and fund something that is a priority. Usually UN is not coming to say we are funding this if it's not a priority for the country. And I think civil society organizations have that opportunity to set the priorities when they are coming together. And also another link might be coming together as consortiums. When we did the Spotlight program in Zimbabwe, again, to try and accommodate this grassroots organizations, we encouraged consortiums. So organizations were coming in 5s to then apply for a grant. One of them obviously would be the managing partner, but then the others were. So that gave an opportunity for smaller organizations. And I think one of our leaders in the ACGBV, Yes Trust, was one of our smaller consortium benefiting organizations in Zimbabwe that benefited from that consortium system. So it's again on coordinating ourselves within the organizations. And then as UN Women, we do try in the ACGBV to alert the countries in terms of the commitment makers that are working on a specific area, because oftentimes, yes, the country office and the commitment makers are not always, they might not know each other. In some countries, they form the collective. I think in South Africa, they have the GBV collective, which works very closely sometimes with UN Women. So they know there's a lot of organizations already. There's a collective of women's rights organizations that are working on GBV. So I will stop there. And then any questions, if you still have any questions, please feel free to send these. We can respond to them as we do the meeting note and we share with everyone. And thank you so much for staying the extra 9 minutes. I know we are 9 minutes overboard. Thank you so much. And really good afternoon. And Yvonne, very unclear, and then the call was reposted several times. Okay, I will ask my colleague from ACT to at least send me something in terms of what was the issue with all the calls, with all the applications they were rejecting, so that at least that can help you, that information for next time when you apply. If there's something you missed, then you can know. So I will ask at least for that brief summary of what exactly was the issue with all the applications that they were rejecting, and then I can share that in our meeting notes. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good afternoon or good evening or good morning from whichever part of the world you're coming from. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.